Welcome to the Mr. Steve Teaches channel. Do you dread complicated terminology in like a chemistry class? Do you wish you could quote some old poetry, some Paul Revere's Riot or something? Or maybe you go to church and you're trying to remember what that verse was. You fail to remember that sacred writing you thought was so awesome. Your need is heard, no more complain, it's memorization methods. In all seriousness, this is just some methods and tips on how to remember things, whether it be a whole passage or just a key word or phrase and what it means. So number one method is skim, study, read, repeat. This is probably the easiest way to memorize something, not necessarily the best, but if you just need to know what it's about really good, there's also a good method of studying if you want to know something really well. So step one, skim through whatever it is you're trying to understand and know. Just get the overall context, the basics, what is this about, and kind of pick up ideas for later. Then, step two, go back to anything you didn't understand. If the wording was confusing, the phrasing was confusing, or you don't know what the words or phrases mean, consult a dictionary, whether paper or online. If you don't know what it means, you're going to have a really, really hard time memorizing it. We'll talk more on that later. Read it then slowly. Most of the time when people struggle to remember something, if they're trying to quote it or something like that, is not so much they don't remember the main idea, it's that they miss all those little words and then it screws up all the cues for the main words and phrases, so they don't fit and then it doesn't sound right and then they get all off track and it makes it a mess. So read it very, very slowly out loud or to yourself, but read every single word, the thes, the prepositions, and, or, all the little words that we usually kind of just skim over. Read those very, very carefully. While they themselves may not be so important, they set up all the key words and ideas. All right, and then repeat this process repetitively until the repeat of reiteration rouses a replay of the repetition and redoing the regrets, which is just a really fancy way of saying over and over again, do it a lot. Repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, and repeat it again. The more you do it, the better you'll get it. Now, some people, they look at this and say, well, if I already skimmed it, do I really need to skim it again? Shouldn't I be able to just, and if I already studied it, do I really need to do that again? Shouldn't I be able to just skip to reading it slowly and pay attention to each word? And that sounds good, but the problem with that is a lot of times if you're just focusing on every single word, your brain will kind of just delete the big picture and you'll forget what this was about overall. So it is still a good idea to alternate skimming through it quickly versus reading it slowly and carefully. If you are familiar with the words, you probably don't need to stop and study and look up definitions, but you do still need to look through any words or phrasing that are awkwardly worded or anything like that and make sure you actually do understand them. And then by all means, yes, do this a lot. The more you do it, the better you'll know it. If you're just like studying and you just need the overall idea, once or twice might be fine. If you're trying to actually be able to quote this, try like 20 or 30 times maybe, and you'll probably be good. But that does depend on the length of the passage. Longer passage, more practice, shorter passage, shorter practice. All right, next method is echoing. This traditionally requires two people. You can just read and then echo after yourself. So, read it, cover the book, and then try to echo it from memory. And that works too. I've done it both ways. I personally prefer to do it just with myself, but I'm a little weird like that. Most people doing this would do it with two people. One person read it, and the other person try to echo it back after them without looking. So it's really not complicated. You have the one person read it, but not the whole thing, just a piece. Let's say you're trying to memorize the Gettysburg Address. Have the one person start off 407 years ago. Person trying to memorize it echoes back 407 years ago. And you go back and forth like that, a section at a time, a piece at a time, a line at a time, until you get all the way through. If it's something really long, like you're trying to memorize the whole US Constitution or something, break it up. You're not going to do that in a day. Memorize one section or one paragraph or whatever. I don't know why you'd want to do that anyway. That's a lot of work. Anyway, but if you do, that's how. Once you've run through it at least once, go back and start doing it with a little bit bigger pieces. So rather than going 7 years ago, go 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent, and then echo it back without looking the other person. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent, and then go forward from there until you can quote bigger and bigger pieces, keep putting the pieces together until you can quote the whole thing all the way through. Next method is if you need to know absolutely every single word. Most people don't need to get this technical. This is by far the most labor-intensive way to do it, but it does also yield the most accuracy. So this simply requires that you write the text, whatever it is you're trying to memorize, the whole thing, preferably multiple times, like 5 or 6 is just a starting point. 50 or 60 is probably about right. Then, without looking, write as much of the text as is memorable, as much of it as you can bring to mind, even if it's, it's not quite right, but it's something like that, put it down. Just see how close you can get. Then go through, check it. If you had to skip over a couple sentences, but you remember that one sentence further along, fill in between, but put in as much in there as you can, and then go back and check and see how good you did. If it really didn't go well and you didn't get past the first line, go back to one of the other 2 methods. This is only if you already have a pretty good idea what you're doing. But if you're doing pretty well and you got most of it on your first or second or third try, then you're going to get there. So keep doing it, keep writing it, maybe write it out another 5 times, and then try doing it from memory again. So if you want to absolutely positively have it down to a single word, that's the way to go. All right, and then just some tips and tricks for just shorter things, terms, definitions, things like that might come up on a test, an exam, whatever it is you're doing. My number 1 piece of advice is simulate the conditions it's going to be in. If this is a written test, practice writing it from memory. If there's going to be some kind of oral test or a speech, practice saying it from memory. Practice it like it's going to be when you're doing it for real. If it's going to be, quoting a poem, do it that way, whatever it is. Then just some other ideas to help with short memories, facts, definitions, alliteration. For example, let's say you've got a class of kids, you're teaching about clams and mussels. You got to tell them that the part of the mollusk that produces the shell is the mantle. So rather than try and memorize some random sentence like that, mollusks' mantles make shells. And it just helps you remember, oh yeah, the mantle, that's the part of these, creatures we're talking about that secretes the not proteins, minerals, the minerals that make the shells. So that's a good way to do it. Or you could do a traditional rhyme. Like for example, if you're trying to teach them what kind of noise a chime is, let's say you've got a class of kids trying to build their vocabulary, you could tell them the bell will chime to tell the time. And the rhyme will help them remember. All right, a good one if you've got multiple things to remember is to use an acrostic. This one, I was trying to teach a class of 5th graders how to tell the difference between a meteor versus a meteorite versus meteoroids. So I was like, okay, let's put an S on all of it. Meteors, meteorites, meteoroids. The only difference in the word is the ending. So I decided, okay, meteors is the ones currently going through the atmosphere burning, the shooting stars. So those are in S for sky. They're in the sky right now. Meteorites, in the Earth's surface, ITES. And that would be telling you that those are the ones that have already crashed into the Earth. That's the ones you'd pick up off the ground. It's pieces of rock from space that have already crashed into Earth. Whereas if it was meteoroids, OIDS, those are the ones still out in distant space. And I don't know if all of the class remembered it all, but at least I could remember it once I did that. And it does help if the teacher knows what it is that they're trying to teach the class. And then the last one is just don't be afraid to be silly. If you want to just say something goofy and off the wall, but it helps you remember it, go for it. So like in this case, this was years ago, I was helping someone, they couldn't remember, okay, plateau, plain, which one's high altitude, which one's low altitude, other than that they're the same. So I randomly came up with the plateau goes ho 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 up in the sky like Santa Claus. So therefore the plain is the one at low altitude. If the plateau is the one up in the sky like Santa Claus, because it went, totally silly, doesn't make any sense, but for that very reason, you remember it. It sticks out in your mind. Like, what on earth does that even mean? So that's a quick set of tips and tricks and advice to help remember some terms, definitions, keywords, things that you're having a hard time with. All right, one more parting thought. Always have a good idea. If you look at it and think this isn't important, your brain is going to treat it like this blank screen. It's going to be like, well, what are we doing here then? Your brain likes to keep itself clean in one sense. If you don't think something's important, your brain will delete it for you. It's called forgetting. And in one sense, that's a good thing. We don't need to randomly remember, what I had for breakfast 5 weeks ago. Who cares? Unfortunately, if you're trying to memorize something for a school project or whatever, and your brain is looking at it like this screen here, your brain just does not care. This is boring. If you have that attitude, you will forget it. I can almost guarantee it. It's really hard to memorize something if you don't want to. So fix your attitude, then you'll have a chance. Either that, or you're going to have to just find some other way to do it. All right, God bless and happy memorizing.